You are listening to Radio Bilingüe on WBFO FM HD3 Buffalo, powered by Sin Fronteras Western New York and presented by Batavia Downs Gaming and Hotel. More information at bataviadownsgaming.com. Sin Fronteras Western New York, Buffalo's media platform for Western New York Hispanics,
producing bicultural content that informs, entertains, and inspires the forward thinking.
Sin Fronteras Western New York, delivering bilingual stories,
hot topic conversations,
and the voices from our Latino community.
Sin Fronteras Western New York,
la única producción contemporánea en español
y en inglés en la ciudad de Buffalo. Sin Fronteras Western New York,
your connection to cultural ties in Latin America
and hyperlocal news in the Western New York area.
Sin Fronteras Western New York es para ti.
All right, and welcome to yet another episode of Sin Fronteras Western New York. I'm your host and producer, Lorenzo Rodriguez, and today we always have really impactful guests, but this gentleman in front of me here is just a lifelong advocate, a lifelong champion for developmental and intellectual disability advocacy. This gentleman is the co-creator of and a black band level disabilities advocate for Art of Advocacy Incorporated. He's got a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and sociology from Canisius College, Master of Science degree in counseling education. He's the former director of Parent Network of Western New York. Most recently, like I mentioned, he's the co-founder of Art of Advocacy Incorporated. He's an Air Force veteran, and more importantly, he's a husband to Joyce and a father of two, Connie and Craig. Mm-hmm. This gentleman right here with me, Max Donatelli. How are you, Max?
I'm doing real well, Lorenzo. Doing very well tonight, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk here and to share some ideas and just to answer some things and maybe just learn some things.
Very modest. You're going to be teaching me. You're not. I'm going to learn from you. And I appreciate you making the time for us. I appreciate, like I mentioned, braving the elements. We're doing this in the middle of winter, and it is it's definitely a Buffalo evening out there. It's snowy. I think we might be the only two left here in the studio. We might have an overnight here, but we have Max on because, as I mentioned, he is the co-creator, co-founder of Art of Advocacy Incorporated, and for decades now, Max has been out there advocating for those that unfortunately sometimes can't advocate for themselves, for families that have loved ones with intellectual and developmental IDD disabilities. Max is a gentleman who's been fighting for and advocating for families of people that have disabilities, that have intellectual and developmental disabilities. You've been doing this now for 42 years, and you've worn a lot of hats. Yeah. You've been a direct care worker. You've been a clinical director, a department head. You've helped high-risk youth in OLV, or what is now OLV Human Services. Before it was known as Baker Victory Services. We're going to get into a lot of these past lives of yours, Max, but I guess we have to start off first and foremost, which your baby right now. You have two babies, but this is one of your passions, the Art of Advocacy Incorporated. Mm-hmm. I want you to tell the folks at home what exactly that is, but you're assuring the rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and what else within that organization.
Well, basically what we're doing, and right now, honestly, it's a startup. I mean, BJ and I started this as an idea probably.
And for those just hearing that name, that's BJ Stasio, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
A monumental advocate in the disabilities community.
Absolutely. He is. He's one of my mentors, one of the people I've learned a lot from. And, and he and I had some big discussions about what we could do to make some changes positive changes within the community of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we talked actually on a weekly basis back, actually right around the time of COVID and thereafterwards about what we could do to develop something that, could really make a difference, because each of us, him as a person with a disability, myself as a parent and as a non-disabled person, and my son, I'm a parent. My son has intellectual disabilities where BJ has physical disabilities, totally different. So what we talked about is, we wanted to do something for a group that he was involved in with self-advocates at the state level. And, so we talked about, well, we could do training. Well, training, a lot of times with training, it's kind of one and done. Okay. And, so you went through the training. Yeah, I went through that training, but what about something that can be sequential? Okay. Well, I suggested to BJ at our meetings, and oh, by the way, we met at Wonder Coffee. Okay, I have to put in a plug for Wonder Coffee,
That's
which
where
is right on Ganson.
major business happens.
Yes, well, this is where our business started, and it's run by his church, Wonder Church there, and so we got to know the folks there, and it just that's where actually this thing was started. Okay. So we said, how could we do something that somebody starts out, kind of at a lower level, but then can build on skills? So I said to him, I said, well, Craig and I, back in the day, several years back, when Craig was in his late teens, we did Taekwondo together. Okay.
You're speaking to a yellow belt Taekwondo.
All right. Okay. So we went all the way up to, and we were working on our black belts.
Careful,
okay?
these hands
I know,
can
that's
kill.
not
No.
license. No, I don't. Right. I had to put.
Once we started breaking blocks and
that's-
boards, I'm like, all right, I think I'm out.
Yeah. Well, we did that and actually did the kicks, breaking blocks, stuff like that with Master Chung, and back before he retired. And so anyway, we thought, that's a good model. I mean, it's a good model. I mean, you start out knowing nothing about Taekwondo, nothing about the Korean. It's a Korean martial art, that kind of a thing. So we did it for several years, and right in Orchard Park. And so it was, I said to BJ, why don't we use that model? And he said, well, rather than using belts. And so BJ said, well, why don't we use wristbands? And so, so that's where the idea kind of started. And we thought, okay, well, then for each one of the levels, we'll have different rubrics for each one of those levels. So we did that, So one of the things that people need to do with the, you got a white belt. Well, one of the things, if you want to move to the yellow band, you need to watch Crib Camp. You need to see how some of this stuff started, how, and we have a whole toolbox of things that we recommend that people, if they really are serious about becoming more effective advocates, that you move on the different bands. We have 5 different bands going from white to black. The black band, and I will tell you, I earned this black band that I have right here, okay? And it is...
Not by breaking boards.
No, but it was BJ testing me and me testing BJ. And BJ will tell you, he's surprised we're still friends. Okay, so, all right, because his perspective is so much different than mine as a parent and him as a person with a disability. We learned a lot in that process.
But you're coming from 2 different angles of seeing a concern and addressing it in different ways.
That's right.
You were Craig's parent, loved one, caretaker, all of it.
Yep.
And BJ's living it, and it's different means of communicating the needs and the blind spots that society has sometimes.
Yep.
So I think that's a perfect marriage. I think it's a fantastic model because I mean, as a former Taekwondo student, you have to meet certain guidelines for each.
That's right.
Again, I stopped at yellow, but I got my white belt or my white band from BJ at an event, a community event, and I hope, and I did see Crib Camp, so I guess I'm due for a yellow.
Well, no, it's more than just watching Crib Camp. There are some other things in the toolbox that we recommend to people that are are learning. And again, we also train people to become mentors. And we work with different organizations that we really would like to see the different organizations kind of take the model on. So that's where we have different requirements for each one of the different levels, and we do have them all. They're not on the website, not yet, and we may not even put them on the website because it's, it really is more individually focused because what my son has a black band, okay, and it was and like BJ say is that nobody gets a pass, okay, you have to really work at it, and advocacy is not easy. Learning to be an effective advocate, to meet with legislators, for example, to be able to meet with government folks and be able to help them to be influenced to move on a certain bill or legislation. It takes some really articulating how important some of these issues are. And and sometimes it takes months, if not years, to be able to get things. We're advocating right now at the state level to get more funding for staff. That are the direct support professionals, the people that are working with my son where he lives. He lives in a self-directed living situation in Amherst, we're in Hamburg. But he's living there, and so we have adults that are doing things, taking him out in the community, that are teaching him independent living skills, that are helping him to be able to live semi-independently.
Which is what I think every parent wants. Every parent across the board just wants their child to have that independence, have that agency for themselves to do things that we all want to do.
That's right. And we have staff that are working with Craig. BJ has staff that are working with him. And, we want to make sure that we have, staff and direct support professionals that are competent, that are caring, that are there because they want to be there, but also are paid fairly, that it's not a minimum wage job.
Like many fields that are in dire need of support, is that what you see you're seeing that as well in terms of help to the IDD community?
Yes, absolutely. It's a huge issue.
If we don't fund these industries and the specialists, we're gonna lose. There's gonna be a brain drain.
That's right.
And you see it in other industries. You see it in first responders and in the air. You're an Air Force vet, pilots, and we need skilled individuals, and I'm glad that you're also advocating for that as well, because I believe there's been a lot of discussions around funding for these services, and recently we had the state of the state,
correct,
and there was discussions going on about Kendra's law and other things that impact this community.
Right.
It's great that there are individuals and groups like yourself and in Art of Advocacy to get that conversation, to push it forward, because it feels like for a long time, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, for a long time, many decades ago, these were not concerns that were talked about openly, or not enough.
Not enough. Oh, absolutely. And part of looking at Crib Camp, for an example, Willowbrook, which really drove the real dialogue back then, and this was only in the 70s. So you're not talking.
I was gonna say, to give for the uninformed at home, Crib Camp, a recent 2020 documentary, and it was all about. I mean, we're talking about the on the heels of Woodstock, when you had that revolution and uprising in the youth. You also had a group of campers that...
The Crib Camp itself was a learning opportunity for them. And the Crib Camp itself, I mean, and BJ's watched it, I think, 57 or 58 times, okay? That's his inspiration, okay? But there was I think there might have been a little bit of smoke and marijuana there. There might have been a little bit of...
It was the 70s.
Yeah, that's right. It was the 70s. And, and they really bonded together. And what they, and so the Crib Camp itself was really more of a place where they kind of learned together about supporting people with disabilities. And when they went back to their own places where they lived, they were not treated as well as when they were at Crib Camp. And so what they ended up doing, and some of them, they did some protests in New York City. There was some protests stopping traffic. And then there was one big thing in California, and again, and BJ can also articulate that because he's seen it so many times. He knows all the dialogue. And but they actually took over for almost, for I don't know how many days, a federal building, in California and San Francisco. I believe it was San Francisco. But they took over a whole building and a federal building as a form of protest, about the treatment of people back then, that there wasn't accommodations, for people with physical disabilities, and a lot of them had physical disabilities. But it was very interesting. And again, I would recommend seeing Crib Camp. I mean, it really shows how a number of the landmark legislation for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities really got started because, a legislator, a congressperson didn't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I think it would be a really good idea to have curb cuts on sidewalks, or it'd be a really nice idea, to be able to have people travel on buses and to have those kind of accommodations in buildings and elevators, so they could get up to the second or the third floor." No, it was fought for. I mean, these people fought long and hard as advocates to be able to get initially 504, which was, of the Rehabilitation Act, that really helped people to get the accommodations like everybody else. It's not for people are asking for more, it's just asking for what other people already have.
Well, one of the figures, correct me if I'm wrong, in Crib Camp in that documentary is Judith Heumann. The late Judith Heumann. She one quote that I saw that was fantastic, and I think it embodies what we're talking about in the heart of Crib Camp. I want to see a feisty group of disabled people around the world. If you don't respect yourself and if you don't demand what you believe in for yourself, you're not going to get it.
That's right.
And it's because of people like Judith that you have some landmark cases and legislation that passed. You said it yourself. It didn't just happen. So for those listening, can you give us a bit of a crash course and a quick civics lesson here on things like Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of '73? There's also the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Americans with Disability Act. Also the Olmstead decision. All those pivotal moments when we talk about civil rights for those with disabilities. Give us a kind of a primer on these.
Watching Crib Camp or seeing, what happened with Willowbrook. And again, people may not be familiar with Willowbrook. Willowbrook was, and again, I really have to say that was one of the driving forces nationally. It happened in New York State, though. They did have others in other states, but the one in New York State was the one that really, became. It was
eye-opening reports.
It was unbelievable. They in the medical community back then, were back, referring and telling parents, when they had kids with various kind of disabilities, well, it's too difficult for you to be able to try to raise your child. Yeah. No, you send them here. You send them to, this developmental center, in Willowbrook. It's on Staten Island in New York City, and it actually became basically where it was, throwaway people. I mean, people that, kind of out of sight, out of mind, just send them there. And the medical community was really encouraging parents to do that. And, and many parents, did not want to necessarily do that. And it actually then became so overcrowded and understaffed. And back then, Raul Rivera's, I think I'm saying his name.
Yes. Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo Rivera was the one doing these reports. He was like Nellie Bly doing this reporting.
Yes, exactly. But it's important because there is remember Willowbrook. Actually, the New York State Council on Developmental Disabilities recently did a kind of a looking back and now looking forward, because Willowbrook was such a hopefully a horrible learning lesson.
It was a galvanizing moment.
Yes, correct. And Geraldo, really exposed it back then. I mean, and there was a psychologist and other people that, that really helped in that process, as well as parents. Some of the parents, just felt that, it was just their son or daughters were just being horribly treated, laying naked, in their own feces in some ways. And if you see the video of, matter of fact, some of the individuals that we work with that are self-advocates that we're teaching, we really are not wanting to show them necessarily how brutally the people, and it was not necessarily the staff. It was the administration. It was the government people at the time that they were, that they were allowing this to occur. And so there was such a move to, to not have that kind of institutionalization. And back then, Robert F. Kennedy, Attorney General at the time said that this was like a snake pit, and it was just a horrible situation. So that really helped to drive some of the initial advocacy of parents, of self-advocates, because many were placed there that were really should have not, they could have done very well within their own families and being in their communities, but parents were encouraged, and they thought that was the right thing to do because the doctors and, nurses were telling them, well, that's where you want to send them. So, and again, it's not all that long ago. It's only in the 70s, and I think they finally closed it, I believe, in 75, 78, something like that. I mean, it was that long before they started moving people out. Mm-hmm. And then they moved them into group homes and more back into the community, and even that had some downsides because many of these group homes became kind of mini institutions in some ways. So that's kind of a whole other discussion point. But the biggest thing is that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities need to be seen as citizens, as community members, as people with civil rights, and myself as an advocate, BJ, my son Craig is an advocate, my wife Joyce is an advocate. We really are, looking for society to be more embracing. Yeah. Embracing as people with disabilities and. And I'd also say too with mental health challenges as well. Because because with the proper kinds of accommodations and supports, many people can live, in the community peacefully and feel self-fulfillment of doing of jobs or being able to do things in the community. And some by different disabilities may be very limited. They may have profound intellectual disabilities because there is that is an issue with some, but there are we have to be able to see their humanity, and I think that's one of the biggest things. And but again, I'm kind of leading up to the to 504 because that was really driven by the heroes, and I will say they were heroes of Crib Camp because it was really self-advocates that helped to get 504 passed at the federal level. And because initially they and they continued to needle the administration at the federal level and just do anything they could to get the attention because it was very challenging.
You don't make changes without raising your voice and rattling a few cages and shaking a few trees.
Absolutely.
And they certainly did.
And they did. And they were successful, fortunately successful. And we want people to know that, that it did take that it does take advocacy to make those kinds of changes. And as Judy Heumann, again, another, one of our heroes, really was one of the people that could help articulate that and could really challenge the powers to be back then, the Congress people, the folks that, the president at the time. And being able to challenge those things. I mean, they did the Capitol crawl, where they actually, where they had a protest where they actually people with disabilities, so many were in wheelchairs. They could crawl. They crawled up the steps of the Capitol to protest and say, we can't get up here in our wheelchairs. The only way we could do it is this way, and it's, in a way, the optics of that were, very obviously very striking. And eventually 504 was passed. And again, the enabling legislation was also passed so that there was teeth in the law. Mm-hmm. So the people that didn't do what was needed, whether it was, new builds with elevators or, curb cuts or whatever it might be, that any kind of federal money, there were strings tied to it that those things that kind of accommodations had to be made, and eventually they got the ADA passed, the Americans with Disabilities Law, that was passed, a landmark legislation. It was signed by George H.W. Bush in 1990, and which is a landmark law that really helped, transportation, access to buildings, employment. I mean, you name it. I mean, it really was very broad, and it had a lot of teeth, to it with the enabling legislation that went with it. And then, which was initially 94-142 of the education law, eventually with a lot of advocacy by parents, primarily, became the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And, that happened during the time, actually, when I became an advocate, back when Craig was younger. Craig is now 36 years old. It was just starting to become the IDEA when Craig was little. And it was previously, it was 94-142, of the education law.
And Max, we've mentioned him now a few times, but like many individuals who champion a cause, you have a very intimate, personal connection to this. Your son, Craig, he has a disability. Can you give us a little bit of background there and why this is so important to you?
My son has Down syndrome. Craig has Down syndrome. He's 36 years old. We feel his Down syndrome is part of who he is. It's something in a lot of ways to be celebrated. And BJ Stasio will tell you the same, with his disability, it's something. Yes, there are things that, that he can't do that other people can do, but it is, in a lot of ways, it is a gift. And I'll tell you a little story. We were very fortunate when Craig was born. We were told at Children's Hospital by this Dr. Luther Robinson that Craig had Down syndrome. But the way he told us, because we were real concerned. I mean, Craig was taken away from us for about almost 3 hours, and we were thinking, no, this is terrible, and what's going on with our son? He looked like he was fine when he came out, and but Dr. Robinson told us, he said, look, Craig is healthy. Craig is, he's gonna, he's got a disability. He said he's going to learn a little slower than other kids, but he's going to be able to play baseball. He's going to be able to do things like the other kids. It's just going to take certain things. It's going to take him a little bit longer to do. But if you had to pick a disability, this is a disability that you'd want to have for your, for your son. So anyway, it was very positive. Now it is not universal because they just passed a bill that actually. Our governor just recently passed a bill that another person you might consider at some point, Emily Munshine from Gigi's Playhouse, helped to get a bill passed that when doctors and the medical staff, when a baby is born with or diagnosed ahead of time that they have Down syndrome, to be able to tell them what the resources are and not that it's this terrible thing, so that. And she signed the bill. I mean, it's called the Down syndrome bill, and and credit to Emily because she was not told very positively. Many parents are not told positively, and it can really affect the child's development.
Absolutely.
If it's seen as this, this horrible hindrance, and we have to see the humanity, and it has to be the humanity first and the disability second.
Right.
That's why we use, person first language. That person is person with Down syndrome. Craig used to say, I am Down syndrome. We say, Craig, no, you're not Down syndrome. You have Down syndrome. But he's very proud of it. Craig works right here across the way at Explore More Children's Museum. And, and he's got a shirt that says, Down syndrome is my superpower. So...
Well, I'm glad you speak so highly of Craig, as every parent should. I have a cousin who has Down syndrome, so I too know that it is very much a component of my cousin David. Yeah, he's got the biggest heart in the family. He is insanely affectionate. Also, will tell you very bluntly, the names he's called me and I've called him, and that's part of our relationship and our rapport. He is, like I said, such a bright light in our family. And again, you mentioned Craig is an athlete. He is, they call him hot sauce because he loves just chugging straight up Tabasco hot sauce. And he'll have a little bottle with him in softball, in basketball, like when he plays the sports. they know him as Hot Sauce for that reason. So it is very much. I saw something on the website that I truly loved, and it is consider your life as a canvas. We each have the power inside of us to paint the picture the way you want it to look.
That's right.
I think that's so powerful when we talk about people with disabilities and how it's you see yourself differently in the mirror than what others might perceive, and you said it right here. It's a component of who you are. It doesn't limit you or put you in a certain box or demographic. Is there a catalyst moment for you to say, I need to be an advocate for my son and others like him?
Yes, it's an excellent question, and absolutely, it was during the time when Craig was very young, and we did, like I said, we were told very positively by this Dr. Luther Robinson at Children's Hospital about, that Craig could learn, and we had people from back then it was Heritage, it's now called the ARC, but Heritage centers back then told us of the value of inclusion, of inclusive education. And, and it was at that point, the people there, that we realized Craig has got to be, as much as possible, seen as a regular citizen, as a regular student, as a, and that, yes, he's got Down syndrome, but he's got potential. He's got potential. So it was back then when Craig was very young. Now, he started his early intervention when he was, I think, 6 months old. No, 6 weeks old. He was 6 weeks old when he first got the supports in early intervention, and it was paid through the Department of Health back then, and then eventually with the school district in Buffalo, because we were living in Buffalo at the time, South Buffalo. And but anyway, but yeah, the inclusion, we saw the importance of inclusion, and it was only just kind of starting back then. And again, this is on the heels of where they were going to this deinstitutionalization, getting people out in the community. Well, now how do you educate those people in that have these differing kinds of of needs, intellectually, developmentally, and we felt Craig could benefit, and so. It was not easy. I will say the early intervention part was relatively easy because back then we were learning ourselves about Craig's capabilities. Craig was healthy. Craig was able to do a lot of things. It took him longer than other kids his age.
We all get to where we need to be eventually.
Yes.
Well, faster, sooner.
That's right.
We all
That's
get
right.
there.
That's right. But so he got there, and we wanted him to get in the Buffalo schools, into this School 90 at the time. And and because that was his, the only school we heard back then that was doing inclusion, and because none of the other Buffalo schools, they were all doing segregated education.
And how did that inclusionary model look like? Was that having?
They had actually done a retreat and a strategic plan on building an inclusive education program, and the principal back then, really. It was in a lot of ways a visionary, and they saw how important that was. Well, we came in and said, well, we want Craig to come here. We said, well, we don't work with kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's so I said, well, you're not doing inclusion,
right?
Then. Okay, so we had developed some good relationships with people in the administration and the board of the Buffalo schools at the time, and and we kind of helped convince the principal that. Let's try this. Okay, let's try this. Let's, have his individual education plan, and we'll have, and she said he's going to have an assistant, a personal aid,
Yep.
And we said fine. Let's, that makes a whole lot of sense. Support him, good, But anyway, he did well, and actually Craig did so well. They really liked him there at School 90. She had an opportunity to open a Stanley Mikowski School in Buffalo, which is, really kind of at the time of, and I think it, to some extent it still is, a state-of-the-art school. I don't know if you've ever been in Stanley Mikowski,
yes.
but we opened it. She asked me, and I hope she doesn't mind that, Linda Crolio is her name, Dr. Linda Crolio. She's, we developed a very good friendship. She wanted Craig and us, because we were real big on parent involvement, she wanted Craig to be a part of the new Stanley Mikowski. She and I went over with hard hats when they were just building it. Okay, so
That's wonderful.
So she actually, Craig convinced her that inclusion is for everybody. I mean, certainly there are times people have some of the students may have a real significant challenge in behavioral issues, medical issues, but by and large, so many can benefit from inclusion. That's
Well, it's also eliminating the other side of that, which is the nasty side of it, exclusion.
Exactly.
And that should be non-existent, I think, in any walk of life. So, I'm glad to hear that there are champions out there for the rights of individuals with disabilities like yourself and art of advocacy. And thank you for going over some of these pivotal moments in general in society, because I think half of it, you mentioned it, that BJ hammers you over the head with, you need to know the history of this movement, because if not, you're not going to be a great advocate. You're not going to be able to sell people on the need for services and legislation and action to happen.
Yes.
And I guess my next question is, as far as we've seen what has happened before, where are we now? What are the new conversations that are being had or need to be had within the disability community?
Well, and I guess a lot of that, would be, who you talk to, because and at any given time, and I think we're much farther ahead than we were before. Although it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle because funding is always an issue. It's in schools, and you do have to have your advocates at schools. We were very big on special education PTAs. Okay, the SEPTAs or SEPSAs, the ones that include students. We had that. When Craig was in middle school and in high school. But I think it's important that the parents realize that that it isn't necessarily going to be an easy road. I mean, you need to be able to articulate your son or daughter's strengths, what their strengths are, and build on those strengths. And that's really what we were very blessed with Craig. Craig had a lot of strengths. I mean, he had a lot of strengths. I mean, I mentioned he could do Taekwondo. He could kick something over his head. Okay. So physically, Craig does not have physical issues. I mean, his kicks were like, and it's just so striking when you think about the differences and the building on strengths. But Craig goes to a personal trainer. They go to Catalyst Fitness. He was there this week. He goes a couple times a week with his buddies, his housemates, there, up in Amherst there, and so. But it's so different.
Roundhouse kicked me.
Oh yeah, he can do roundhouse.
It reminds me
much better than I could.
It reminds me of I'm sure you've seen it, the Johnny Knoxville movie, The Ringer.
Yes.
It involves the Special Olympics. This is a horrible individual who decides to cheat his way into the Special Olympics, thinking that he could take on everybody, all the other athletes, and gets shown real quick that it's not about how able you are. It's really everyone. How much they can prove themselves. And is Craig involved with Special Olympics? Is that something?
He's had some, actually he's done some things with Special Olympics, probably a little less. He's done done touching bases, which is a baseball league.
Yep.
He enjoys going to that. But so he's done things that are more geared towards just kids, like Saba. Saba has, primarily, people, young people and adults that, it's skating on ice, Saba. And he likes that. I mean, and that's geared more for people with disabilities. But he also goes, personal trainer, to Catalyst Fitness, where people without disabilities. So I mean, he easily moves within, things that are geared, toward the general population, and also some of the things that are, more geared towards special populations. And as much as we kind of are guided by what he likes, what his interests are, what turns him on. Just like everybody else.
I bring up the Special Olympics because I know that's a hot button topic now, with the funding kind of being in limbo. I think they're considering taking back some of the funding or bringing it down. So as far as topics pertinent to the disabilities community, that's one that I've heard of now in the being spoken about. But is there any in your opinion, I guess, what's the biggest barriers that still exist for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and how can advocacy overcome that?
Well, I think I think one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to, as much as we can, work with organizations that have an interest in the people that they're serving to learn how to advocate for themselves. Because I think that, one of the benefits that I think Craig has gotten as far as we had advocacy in his IEP, his individual education plan, from the time he was about 8 years old. We wanted him to become his own advocate. And Craig has become his own advocate. I mean, he tells us, what he really feels that he needs. And so many times, and we want parents to learn how to become advocates, but also be cognizant of the fact that they also need to be thinking about, can their son or daughter become their own advocates as well? Because down the road, they're going to need to be able to do that as an adult.
So within the community, I'm assuming that Art of Advocacy also, you mentioned that mentorship is such a huge component of it. It's showing somebody else the path.
Yes.
Are there members like Craig that are that have an intellectual disability that are doing that to others in the community? Is that
Yes,
a
correct.
component of?
Yes, there's actually some people that are doing that. We have people that are working as mentors, to younger folks that or less experienced folks, and actually I'll mention this one that's working with the ARC of Steuben, and Allegheny and Steuben counties, and this one Joe, he became a black band level, and he's a person with a disability, but he helped on working, with voting, getting voting booths, being able to see that, those that, that need accommodations for voting, he was a real change maker in that area. And he now is working with folks, that are self-advocates within his ARC organization as an advocate, helping them. Matter of fact, we have a picture, I don't think we have it on the website yet, but we have a picture where several of these self-advocates there that Joe's been working with and other folks there were working with as mentors, that they all got their yellow bands at the same time. So they all are raising their arms like
Awesome.
this with their yellow bands, that they were able to accomplish that. Now they're going to be working on their green bands.
Joe's got like a coaching tree
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
to keep it in the realm of sports.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I am speaking with Max Donatelli. He's the co-creator, the co-founder of Art of Advocacy, a gentleman who's been out in this community advocating and really bringing to the forefront the needs and the issues that the disability community has or haven't been addressed. And Max, you, like I mentioned prior, you've been around high-risk youth in foster care. You've worked with families. You have a degree or multiple degrees in psychology, sociology, counseling. We talked about briefly before the interview the another adjacent issue, which is mental health. That affects everybody. And with your work at Baker Victory Services, was Baker Victory, now OLV, what are the concerns you saw then, because that was some time ago, that you're still seeing today that are not yet being addressed or not being addressed properly?
Well, I think one of the things is that many times young people, that may not, that may be born into families that have various kinds of challenges, whether those be drugs, whether they be domestic violence situations, whether they be, any number of, poverty, whatever, neglect, we worked with kids, young people from 12 to 17 back when I was working with, in residential with those young people. And, and I think one of the things that we helped to make some significant changes back when I first started, as a staff group, of really trying to have it go from more just housing them or having them there as kind of punishment because they couldn't handle their school system or couldn't handle their community. They were labeled as juvenile delinquents or persons in need of supervision or, other kinds of, recalcitrants, but, so many of them were able to, with the right kind of building of relationships, were able to really eventually through time, sometimes a year, 2 years, we're able to really then be able to go back into their communities and be back into their families and learn different kinds of ways of getting their needs met, rather than the kind of things that got them there might be, intimidation, assaulting, some, were self-destructive, suicidal, but being able to build on their strengths. And so many of them, if you really develop good relationships with people, you can find their strengths. And if you really believe in them, they can then help to learn how to believe in themselves. So to answer your question, that there still is some of that mentality that's there, that people, that are juvenile delinquents, that's a dead end for them. No, if you have the right kind of people, the right kind of staff, and also you pay them fair wages, that you can really get people to work with and find those, those things that they can be good at, things that they can do, so I think that there still is a challenge within our society because there are so many competing good things out there, that are
Noble
are
causes
noble
and- yeah.
That's the word. Yeah, noble causes that are there. And I in some ways I feel sorry for the governor and for legislators because there are a lot of good causes out there. There really truly are. I mean, you're working with Big Brothers Big Sisters. I mean, it's a wonderful cause. We had kids that got benefited when I was working at Baker from that organization. But the thing is, you really need to be able to people that are working with and where you call them mentors, where you call them staff. The staff, the paid staff really need to be recognized that they're really helping to shape the lives of young people, and eventually being able to support people, adults, and keep them in their communities and live quality lives, whether that be in the community, in their own places or, in a group living kind of a situation. But you have to have people that really believe in that and really believe that people can do better. And so, but again, it's these, so many causes and you always have, and you get this political polarization, that, it sucks the energy
Max,
out
that's another episode of.
I know, that's right.
We're gonna fix that
that
one at another point.
Kick that can down the road. But
No, but I bring this up. I bring up that question because I think at the heart of this conversation and what you do is you have it in the name, advocacy.
Yes.
I think today we're speaking about individuals with disabilities, but we talked about just now mental health. That's something that for a long time wasn't spoken about, especially in the Hispanic community. You might ask, like, why this conversation on a Hispanic targeted program?
Yeah.
It affects. These are conversations that all demographics are having. They're encountering these are conversations at the dinner table. These are things that for a long time, as we mentioned, they went unspoken.
That's right.
So whether it's fighting for the rights of individuals that are disabled, whether it's fighting for better mental health services,
Right.
whatever it may be, everyone has something that unfortunately isn't being, the needs that aren't being met.
That's correct.
And that's in all walks of life. And at the end of the day, I hope what people get from this, not only the need to be advocates for the disabled community, but also find those causes out in their world that need advocating for. So I guess looking forward and with that in mind, what is your long-term vision for Art of Advocacy and the broader disabilities rights movement?
Well, I think what we're looking to do is really help help organizations, and probably more at the leadership level, and probably mid-leadership level, and those that are working with self-advocates and those that are working with parents, to be able to see the real value in people being able to learn how to become their own advocates, and not be threatened by it. And I think that that's one of the things that sometimes people think about when they think about advocates is they think about the in-your-face advocate, the ones that are going to, lie down in the street, or, that are going to, be oppositional about, anything that's out and shake the status quo. Where good effective advocates really are ones that really are generally, and we really want people to be reasonable about how they do their advocacy, but also learn how to push when it's needed. But being able to disagree without being disagreeable. That there are ways that you can, we talked a little bit before about being able to, to find and hear the other side of things, and in school systems, being able to know, yeah, there are certain kind of limitations on funding, but, if somebody really needs and they need to have an elevator, in a school, then they're going to have to really bite the bullet and get that elevator so that, that student that's in a wheelchair is going to be able to get up to and be able to enjoy the same kind of classes and the same kind of opportunities, that the other students have, so that there's equalization, so that basically what BJ and I really want to do, is help work with and teach other folks with disabilities as well as family members and allies how to become more effective. And we're trying to do that through the organizations like, the People Inc., the Aspires, the ARCs, and so on, and work with them because many of them do have very good potential mentors that are there, and then we can work with them, and then in turn, kind of a turnkey kind of a thing, then they can then work with folks there that are just learning how to become advocates and why it's so important. Because the only way things change in our society is really truly through advocacy, but people doing it in a way that, can be effective, but also, being able to be able to also listen to the other sides of issues and things where we're actually able to have some really good dialogue and good discussions. And that's what we're really trying to teach is that, kind of that reasonability, but also knowing that sometimes it does take a little bit more of a kick to get the status quo to move. So
If you are just complacent and just accept what's given to you and even though it's not adequate or equitable,
Right.
then it's never going to change. And
Right.
and unfortunately, you and I are not getting any younger. We need a new generation of folks to
Yes,
advocate for themselves,
that's
as
correct.
you have so graciously said,
Mhm.
and also for those around us that might not have the know-how or the ability to do so.
Right.
It's been a fantastic conversation, Max. I guess the last thing I want to leave us with, if you could inspire one major change in society's approach to the inclusion for people with disabilities, and a parting thought for those listening, what would that be?
Well, I think one of the things that I think the acceptance of a person that they have a disability, I think is probably one of the things that kind of helps them to be able to move on. Our son Craig his advocacy is, I've seen it grow over the years, and like I said, we've had it since he was 8 years old and becoming more effective as an advocate and so on. And like I said, he moved through the 5 bands up to black. One of the things that he did very well was meeting locally here with the Bonnie Lockwood Kane, who is actually the governor's regional director here in Western New York. And BJ, Joyce, my wife, and Craig met with her actually on a couple of occasions. But Craig talked about with her how much the staff mean to him that are working with him, and why it's so beneficial, and how much he's benefiting from living, in a semi-independent living situation, and having these wonderful staff that are working with him, and he was able to articulate that, and that's actually when BJ and I said to each other. BJ actually said it first. He deserves his black band. And on top of that, more recently, but actually in the last year, he's asked his local assembly person, Karen McMahon, to be a part of his life planning process. And once every 6 months, he has a life plan. Well, he asked her to be a part of his life plan, and she's agreed.
That's
She
something
agreed.
some other members of society should be doing, and yet Craig's got a leg up on all of us.
Yes, that's
I
right.
could afford to do some more life planning. I mean, Max, I say it wholeheartedly. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm glad that we got you here on Sin Fronteras because, again, these are conversations and initiatives and just a reminder to everyone that we need to be stewards of each other and speak out for those that sometimes might not have a voice or might not know how to speak out on issues. So I applaud you for the work you're currently doing, for the work you've done before, because the world needs more people doing that, I feel like. So
Good. Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity, and again, I hope at some point in the not too distant future, you invite my friend, BJ Stachio.
The door is always open,
It's-
and we always welcome here on Sin Fronteras.
Yes.
If anyone wants to get in contact and help out with Art of Advocacy, or they themselves want to go through the 5-band training process, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can get a hold. We do have a website. It's artofadvocacy.com, not .org, but .com. And, and you can get a hold of us there. We have our contact information is there. We're going to be putting more and more information because, again, we're a startup, 501c3, and noble cause, and we are, really, looking to be able to work with organizations, and we will be meeting with different organizations as well as for the future as well as funders, to be able to help to build this so that we can really get out and do more of sharing what we've learned and then help teach so that other folks can teach, And I also want to give a plug too in the mental health side too, for this, the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition is letstalkstigma.org, okay? Because there are resources out there as well, something that we built in the mental health community because the stigma of mental illness and people not getting the help that they need that have mental health issues, the stigma really holds people back. And we really want to be able to see people. There's help out there. There's people like myself that, are willing to work with people that have various kinds of special challenges and stuff like that. And I did it for many, many years at Baker, now OLV. There are people out there that can help, and it's not something to be ashamed of.
Mr. Max Donatelli, thank you so much for being on with us. I appreciate it, and thank you for joining us and educating our audience.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Lorenzo. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, that just about does it for this week's episode of Sin Fronteras. It's about all the time we have, but I want to thank Max Donatelli once again, the Art of Advocacy. And I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us this week. You're listening to Sin Fronteras, Western New York, on Radio Bilingüe, 88.7 HD3 Buffalo. Thank you very much. See you next week. Nos vemos.